Absolute joy to be interviewing Dr. Thomas Verny today, somebody who's had a great impact on my career, originally with his book, The Secret Life of the Unborn Child, which, as an adoptions professional at that time in my life, really woke me up, wondering what was going on for our children before they came into the world. And we moved them from one place to another. And I truly have admired your work all these many years since. So for me, it's just a real privilege to be able to talk with you today.
Well, it's a real pleasure to meet you again after all these years.
It has been a long time. You're still in Canada, correct?
Yes, I'm still in Canada. I live in Stratford, a small town known for its Shakespearean festival, about 2 hours from Toronto.
Beautiful area and beautiful city. And you're not
Yes.
far from Dr. Michael Grand, one of our other legacy folks. He's in Guelph.
Oh, yeah, that's 45 minutes from here. Yes.
Yes, well, you and Michael would like each other a great deal.
Oh, okay.
A researcher, probably the leading researcher in Canada on issues of adoption. He was the head of the Department of Psychology at the
Hmm.
University of Guelph, and he and his wife Eileen, also a psychologist, are semi-retired. But I think you'd be great friends. He would.
Well, I would be happy to meet him. Yes.
But it's important to me that you have an opportunity to share what's most important to you about your career. So, what would be some of the highlights that you'd like the audience to know about you and your work?
That's a tall question. That's a tall question. Well, highlights. I suppose one of the highlights was when I was 13 years old and I had just arrived with my parents in Vienna, and I did not speak any German. And we stayed in an apartment where there were some books on the shelf there. And there was a book by Freud uh, called The Interpretation of Dreams. And
Mm.
I did not, like I said, I did not speak any German, but I had a German Slovak dictionary because I'm from Bratislava originally. And I started, and somehow I knew, I don't know how, but I knew that Freud was like important. Like this is something you should read about. An inner voice told me. So I started reading it with my dictionary, and I learned to speak German more or less by reading Freud.
Wow.
And I really loved the way his mind was working and the way he was sort of unearthing sort of hidden secrets from the self, from the person himself or herself. And I like that sort of archaeological inquiry that he had. And so at that point, to make a long story short, at that point I made up my mind that I would become a psychiatrist. So that was very, very important.
Mhm.
Then I entered medicine in Toronto after we emigrated to Canada a few years later. And the general direction here at that time, these are sort of the late 50s, was very anti-psychiatry,
Mm.
very, very, very anti-psychiatry. The it was taught by a lot of really traditional medical doctors who had no understanding of the inner world of people or feelings or emotions, anything like that. So the impression that I got was that psychiatrists treat rich ladies from Rosedale or Forest Hill, in Toronto, sort of the upscale areas, who are only concerned about their dachshunds.
They're what?
They're little dogs,
Oh,
dachshunds.
they're okay. They're little dogs. Okay.
Yeah, those tiny little
Yeah,
dogs. Yeah,
yeah.
chihuahuas, whatever. So, I mean, I didn't want to spend the rest of my life treating ladies who are concerned about their dogs. So, but before the last year of my medical studies, so between the third and the fourth year, I chose to go to the Middletown State Hospital, which is in Upper New York.
Oh, okay.
And so I was working there as a doctor because they didn't have enough doctors. So I was treated as if I was a full-fledged doctor. And they asked me which part of the hospital. We had 5,000 patients.
Wow.
Which part of the hospital I would like. 5,000 patients, probably about 30 doctors.
Wow.
But the doctors were mostly foreign doctors who would go in the morning, go through the wards, prescribe medications, retire to their rooms, and study for their exams.
My. Oh, my. Yeah.
I, on the other hand, didn't have to study for exams. I had the whole day. And so I went to work on the emergency ward where the really, really sick patients would first come in. And like, I knew very little about psychiatry, but I knew that you had to take a history, right? So I took a history and I started asking about their families. And after my initial interview, I would see them again, perhaps in a couple of days. And within a week, the word got around that there's a psychiatrist here who actually talks to patients.
Wow. Wow.
So I would have these long lineups of patients in front of my little office waiting to speak to me. And my patients got better a lot faster than any of the other doctors' patients. And so I saw with my own eyes, right? I experienced the fact that psychiatry really, can make a difference, that, it is as important as surgery or cardiology or any of the other subspecialties. So that's when I became a psychiatrist. So then the next important thing happened. I was invited to an obstetrician's home, my wife and I, for dinner. And while we were speaking, he said that there's going to be an international conference, psychosomatic obstetrics and gynecology in Rome in 1978, something like that. Yeah, I think 1978. And he said, if you present the paper, you will be treated much better than just like a regular attendant. So, and I told him a little bit about the work that I was doing at that time with memories going back to birth. And he said, why don't you present the paper? And so I sent in a paper and I called it The Psychic Life of the Unborn Child.
Oh, my. Okay.
Okay. So, as luck would have it, and I have experienced this so often in my life, you have to work hard, you have to be talented, you have to be bright, and you have to be lucky.
What a combination. Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And I was lucky. They accepted my paper. Not only did they accept my paper, but like I was a totally unknown young psychiatrist from Toronto. Not only did they accept my paper, but they put it on the main program in the morning, together with R.D. Lang. Do you still R.D. Lang? Right.
Yes.
Okay. R.D. Lang and some of the absolutely leading lights of psychosomatic obstetrics. And so I had 20 minutes to present my paper, and I could see as I was presenting my paper that there was this huge excitement in the attendees. Like there were about 500 people there, and they were all with me. Sometimes you feel people being with you.
Yes.
And so at the end of my 20 minutes, I said, if you're interested in pursuing the subject further, come at 5 o'clock at the end of the lectures, come at 5 o'clock to room 514, whatever it was, and we'll talk some more. Well, at 5 o'clock, room 514, there were millions of people milling about, trying to talk to me.
You lit a spark.
I lit a spark. And so once I noticed that, and I met R.D. Lang face to face, and I met many of the other people whose names right now I can't recall, but they were important people. So once I had that under my skin, so to speak, that's when I started writing The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. Now, originally I called it The Psychic Life of the Unborn Child, but Simon & Schuster, the editor there, decided that that was too far out, too off the wall, because psychic, sounds like off the wall, ESP, extrasensory perception, all that kind of stuff. So he decided to call it The Secret Life of the Unborn Child. And so that's when I wrote The Secret Life. And then when I was at that time, publishers had money, which they don't seem to have today, unless you're Prince Harry or something like that. And so, so the publisher, after the publication of my book, sent me across the country, across the United States, to publicize it, which of course made a huge difference. But when I was in Los Angeles, I met David Chamberlain, who I'm sure you still remember.
Yes. We're mentioning names that people who are watching may not actually know. Just briefly, David Chamberlain was, yes.
Yeah. So David Chamberlain was a psychologist who had done a lot of research on hypnosis. And one of his famous studies was that he had about 15 or 16 couples, mothers and their grown-up children, and he hypnotized each of them separately, taking them back to their births, like the mother to the birth of that particular child, and that particular child to his or her own births, and try to compare the descriptions. And very often, there was great coming together. Can't think of the word right now.
Accuracy and similarity.
Accuracy. Yes.
Sure.
Thank you. So I met him in Los Angeles when I was on the Merv Griffin show. I was there on the Merv Griffin show. Afterwards, I met David, and we struck up a friendship. And then he and I decided to hold a conference in Toronto, the first Pre- and Perinatal Psychology Association that I organized, and that was a huge success. And after that, we formed the Association for the Pre- and Perinatal Psychology Association of North America, which was then later renamed APA, the Association for Pre- and Perinatal Psychology and Health.
Which is still so active and wonderful today. It's still one of the most informative conferences, certainly for me. Yes.
So those were the highlights. The publication of my book, of course, was tremendous, and it changed my life.
Yes.
And like you said, it changed the life of thousands. I'm not exaggerating, probably tens of thousands of people.
Yes. And you continued your work. You were just telling me before we started the formal interview that you have a brand new book out, The Embodied Mind, which is like kind of the next step in our thinking process. Could you tell the audience a little bit about that? I'm so excited. I can't wait to order it.
Sure. Well, like I said, I was surprised by reading about 8 years ago about a Frenchman who was perfectly well functioning, but it turned out that he had hardly any brain tissue. And so his skull was filled with fluid, cerebrospinal fluid. And I was wondering how anybody could function so well without a brain. And so that started me on this research that took me 7 years to find out how the body, in a way, all the cells, tissues, and organs in the body are really sort of like a backup system on your computer, so that whatever happens in the brain is also transferred to all the other cells in the body and vice versa. And we have lived for centuries, for God knows how long, in a culture which is essentially patriarchal. And that means that everything is from the head down. It's hierarchical. And so you have the head of the family, you have head of the party, you have the head of the government, you have the chief inspector. Like, everything is hierarchical.
Yes.
And everything is from the top down. And hardly any attention is paid from the bottom up. What happens from the bottom up? And then, of course, you have, in addition to that, you have sort of the church's kind of sour view of the lower chakras, right?
Yes, that's
So
right.
let's not talk about sex. So everything is about the head, and the body is neglected.
Yeah.
And so the other thing that is so important about what I discovered and that is where I think your interest also comes in, is the fact that because cells carry so much information, they carry memories. And so it matters what your father and mother experienced. It matters even what their mother and father experienced, because memories are being passed on from generation to generation. Many of the fears, phobias, anxieties, depressive attitudes that we have really inherited through our genes, which is through the egg and the sperm that we were conceived by. So this is incredibly important, and I'm really glad, that in these later years of my life, I was able to put such important information together. And so that's in the embodied mind.
Oh, it's so exciting. It makes me, of course, certainly when we lecture about the brain, we talk about the development of the brain is from the bottom up.
Yes.
And yes, and I was thinking from my own religious perspective as a Jewish woman, that when you study Kabbalah, you study that the tree of life, if you will, shows up in every cell of our body, that the memories of our ancestors are carried from a Jewish perspective in every single cell of our body.
Really?
I
didn't know that. That's in the Kabbalah?
That's in the Kabbalah. And so what's interesting to me also is that we've talked about people going through rebirthing experiences, and in terms of some self-hypnosis being so everything that I've been learning over these many years certainly fits with this. It's very exciting. Of course, I'm a little out there too. My friends would say, well, you're pretty out there, and I am. But what's true,
and you're proud of it, right?
I'm very proud of it. And what's true is that what you're talking about is that the world's catching up to us.
Yes.
It's very exciting.
Yes.
But what an impact it has on adoption and permanency.
Yes.
Because certainly in the field of trauma and attachment, which has become so much a part of adoption, because so many of our kids are placed in foster care today, and they've been traumatized greatly. We've certainly learned that peoples, whether they're Black or Native American, we know that they carry the trauma of their ancestors, that they have these shortened telomeres. They don't live as long. They're more apt to be sick. We certainly have seen this in the ancestors of Holocaust survivors. So everything that you're teaching us fits so much of what we're doing today in our work of adoption and permanency. It's very exciting, so validating.
Let me tell you about one core experiment that, as far as I know, it's very short, which to my mind really speaks to some core problems, challenges, if you like, in adoption. And
Yep.
this was done a long time ago by Thompson, and then later on by Adder and Belfer. And what they did, I will explain. What they did was that they took some female rats and they exposed them to mild electric shock. And at the same time, they sounded a loud buzzer. So that became sort of the conditional stimulus, the
Yes.
loud buzzer.
Yeah.
After training, after they were exposed to this kind of conditioning, they were mated. During their pregnancies, the buzzer was sounded, but no shock was given.
Okay.
But because they were trained to expect a shock when the buzzer was sounded, they were constantly in a state of anxiety, like you, for example, would be expecting to receive a shock when you heard the buzzer. So they were constantly anxious, but there was no physical interference.
Okay.
A control group of pregnant rats was exposed to the buzzer, but of course it didn't bother them at all. Okay.
Okay.
Then they had their children. Then what the researchers did was that they took half of the children from the control group, in other words, the non-anxious mothers, and gave them to be reared by the anxious mothers, and vice versa. They took half of the pups from the anxious mothers who were exposed to the shock initially and put them into the care of the non-anxious mothers. Okay, this is a very, very good study. It's called cross-fostering.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes.
So this is what was observed, and this is what I think is so important for people in foster care and adoption to realize. Okay. So regardless of which mothers they were reared by, pups from anxious mothers were more anxious.
Wow. Even though their environment had changed to
Right.
the non-anxious mother.
Right. And if one of your viewers wants to know how do we know that pups are anxious, well, there are two things that they measure. They're placed in an open field, and anxious pup rats will go to the borders, like they are fearful of open spaces, and also there's increased defecation and decreased activity.
Okay.
Okay.
Uh-huh.
Stressed mothers demonstrated a different parenting style, electing more negative reactions in the pups they raised, even when the pups were from normal mothers.
My goodness. Okay.
The anxious mothers demonstrated a different parenting style. And the stressed pups, in other words, pups from stressed mothers, elicited more negative maternal behavior from unstressed mothers.
Oh, something we see in foster care all the time.
Exactly.
Yes. Oh my
Exactly.
goodness.
So this is, I mean, it's so simple,
Yes.
but it is so, I mean, so logical, right? I mean, all you have to do is think about it and you say, yeah, that makes sense.
Yes.
That makes
Yes.
sense. So, in terms of your adoptive mothers, I mean, what they have to realize is that many of these children, come from stressed mothers.
Yes.
I mean, how else would a mother be who knows at some point in her pregnancy that she's going to give up her child?
Right.
Okay, we are not dealing with a normal mother, normal in the sense of, normal feelings, emotions, that kind of stuff, right? So those children are stressed, no matter how you look at it.
Yes.
And so they will, they will elicit more negative maternal behavior, especially if the adoptive mother, for example, has already had a child, which happens sometimes, right? Like some of the adoptive mothers may have had their own child, and then later they realize they would like to have another one, and for some reason they can't have one.
Yes.
So they go for an adoption, or they think it would be a charitable thing to do to adopt a child from Syria or wherever, right? And then they compare the two children, and they find, gee, what's wrong with this one? How come that this one is not as well behaved, quote unquote, right, as my other child? Well, now you know why.
Yeah. Yes. Oh,
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that. That's very relevant to our work. I was thinking about a larger life for you. You know, you're a doctor, a psychiatrist, a researcher, a writer. What other things do you do in your life that round you out as a person?
Well, I have a podcast.
Oh, you do?
I have a podcast. It's called Pushing Boundaries.
Oh, okay.
Okay, and you can find that on all your favorite channels.
Okay.
And I write a blog for Psychology Today.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yes. I only started about 1.5 years ago. I've had so far 225,000 downloads on my blogs.
Oh, my goodness. You've got quite a following.
Yes. And then I play chess.
Oh, you play chess. Well, that makes sense given your mind. Okay.
Right. So those are some of the things that keep me busy. Yes.
Well, those are some of them quite professionally involving, and chess, I'm hoping, is fun and relaxing for you.
Oh, it is. Yes. Yeah, I love chess. Yes.
You and your children, you and your wife have children?
Yes, we have children and they are all well, thank God. We have grandchildren, and I have one great grandchild who just is 2 years old.
Oh, mazel tov. Okay.
Thank you.
Kind of like to see the larger person here.
Yes.
Yeah. So when you're no longer on this side of the veil and people are talking about you, or somebody's writing a eulogy for you, what would you like people to say?
You're going to get me emotional here. I would like
Emotions
them
are
to
healthy.
say,
That's good.
I would like them to say that I made a difference in their lives for the
Well,
better.
yeah. I can certainly tell you that here sits one person that you
Thank you.
did that for. And I'm sure your latest book will take it even further down the road. Certainly have had a great impact on how I viewed my career. So I thank you for that. That's a beautiful thing to be remembered for. You have made a big difference.
Thank you.
And in terms of the folks who are watching this, who are maybe future psychiatrists or social workers or psychologists, or even just families who are thinking about adoption, what would be your final thoughts for them? Things that you really want them to know from your work over the years?
In terms of adoption?
It could be adoption, it could be in general. What would you like people to think about as we move towards the end of this interview? Your kind of final thoughts, and anything that comes to mind is acceptable.
Well, let me see. I think trying to put yourself into the other person's shoe before you make any important decisions about that other person. Like if you're trying to be a friend or a mother or a father, try to understand where that other person is coming from, instead of very quickly make a judgment, particularly a negative kind of a judgment, I'm like we were talking about this research project, right? About the pregnant rats, and to realize, for a mother that this child has had already a difficult 9 months. This child is not new to the world, right? This child has a history of 9 months and perhaps a few days and weeks following birth. This is not a tabula rasa. This is not a clean slate.
Yes.
And it's the same thing with other people, like I'm in this theater town in Stratford, And let's say I'm sitting there, and 10 minutes after the performance, somebody comes in, and everybody has got to stand up, so that they can sit down. And so I hear people saying, "Oh God, what's the matter with those people? Can't they ever be on time?"
Uh-huh.
They could have been in a car accident. Their
Yeah.
mother could have had an emergency and they had to take her to the hospital. Don't judge.
Yes.
Okay, don't be so quick, especially to make negative judgments, because that only creates more anger and more pain in the world, and we don't need that.
I think that's so relevant because we're in a judgment position as
Yes,
therapists, as social workers, trying to
yes,
decide if a family is ready to adopt,
yes.
or how they're doing with a child. Psychologists who are doing assessments, all of
Mhm.
those things require judgment, and
Right,
often harsh. In
right,
our field, can be very harsh. I
right.
think the piece that I'm sure everybody wants to know is whether your next book is going to look at what we can do with all of that cellular memory that we carry for all the ancestors before us, all of the fears and concerns and traumas. How are we going to get to that and get into the healing side of our work, given that we do carry that our whole body is the mind, and
Hmm.
that we're looking at how do we do the proper treatment? How do you do a good adoption? How do you save a baby who's had 9 months from that loss and trauma? Is there any way to do it right? Is the questions that we're all asking. And I would love it if that your next 7 years, God willing, you could answer that question for us, Dr. Verny.
That would be very optimistic. But yes, I think that perhaps we should eliminate the word right. Um, I think that, because you were saying, and I'm not being critical, but you were saying that, how do we tell them how to do it right? Um, I think how to do it better might be better.
Okay, I'm with you. Yes, yes. How
Right.
to do it better.
Because who knows what is right, really? We know what is wrong.
Yeah, we do.
So, yeah, so I think that we are on a surer footing when we talk about things to avoid. And I think that we can make some headway in that direction, uh, following the very simple, study that I just talked about a few minutes ago. I think that we have to give adoptive parents a lot more information. Like, there are many
Mhm.
adoption agencies, particularly private ones, that are, in terms of finance, they want to be financially solvent. I can understand that, of course. We all have to make a living, but at the same time, I don't think that they are as open as I would like them to be about some of the problems. I hate the word challenges. To me, a problem is still a problem. It's not a challenge. Some of the problems that you might encounter in adoption, you have to know what kind of a family that child is coming from, and you have to be prepared for some rough times at the beginning.
Mhm.
Okay, because you're really dealing in some ways with a emotionally traumatized person, a
Yes.
tiny person, but still emotionally traumatized. We don't know, what kind of recreational drugs that mother was taking. We don't know how she was treated by the father of that child. There are just so many things we don't know. And when we do know, and they strike us as negative, and we want to make sure that this child is being adopted, so we are not going perhaps to tell the future adoptive parents everything,
Mhm.
because it might dissuade them from adopting this child, right? So
Mhm.
we think that we are actually serving that child well by not telling the adoptive parents about all the problems that might arise, but I don't think so. You know, I think that it really it really asks for honesty. I really think that an honest approach is best. Full disclosure, tell them everything, let them know what they are in for, then they are better prepared to really raise that child as best as they can.
Thank you. I can't tell you what a joy this has been. I
Oh,
thank
really?
you so much for your time, for your work.
Thank you.
Can't wait to get the book. Can't wait to sign up for your podcast.
Okay,
And,
please do, and tell your friends. Tell your friends. Let's stay in touch.
I would like that very much. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.